Hey, good afternoon, my friends. It's July 8th, 2022 at about 10:48 a.m. my time. And just a quick truth bomb here because I think it's kind of time that I got to show a lot of my cards here. So, look, we're in this crazy intersection of everybody is just, who is everybody? In media, everybody is clamoring over each other to be heard, to be seen, to be able to deliver something that is going to create some sort of audience, that's going to elevate some sort of message that keeps people in the game. And it's always a game of chess. It's a game of poker. It's a game of whatever leverage that can put certain sort of, let's say, established names in kind of the catbird seat to be able to determine what is the narrative of the day, depending on who's that audience requires. So MSNBC and CNN and Fox, they all have specific verticals based on a massive corporate sort of entity that has the ability to reach millions, and they've, over the course of decades, configured their audience to deliver the sort of messaging and information that those people are going to respond to. What's happened in independent media is kind of the next level down from that, where everybody is clamoring about to say, well, mainstream media gets it wrong, but at the same time, we're going to do our own version of what that is, because they're clamoring for audience share too, and it becomes about this me thing. And yet, really, nobody has done the work to go the distance to understand what is systemic corruption. And so, I've stayed on this theme for the last couple of days in all of my social media sort of endeavors, because I want you guys to understand that this isn't the first time in American history that this has happened. In fact, I'd argue that this happens at every moment in American history. But we're an ambitious lot. We have always been resistant to centralization. We're independent. The whole notion of liberty is central to how we were born in the first place. And then from that moment forward, there's always been this sort of vexing back and forth control of who's got the leverage and who's doing it for what outcome versus the principles of what America is supposed to be. And so from the time period between the late 1890s, which is the age of the robber barons, through trust busting, which is the age of Teddy Roosevelt, through FDR, which is the New Deal, basically you had all of these groups come together to be able to synergize the sort of ambition and the demand for justice, liberty and justice for all. I mean, there was the farmers' populist movement, which was to basically break the cuffs of monopoly from Wall Street to control their outcome, and that was part and parcel to the increase in labor rights movements based on the industrialization in the United States, where monopolies were basically slave owners of labor until they fought for progressive wages and time off and things that would enable people to literally have a slice of the American dream. I mean, that was the early parts of it, not to mention women's suffrage and other things like the civil rights movement. And that's been part and parcel of the United States evolution from the very beginning, which, of course, the abolitionists and the Civil War and everything that led to the civil rights movement. I mean, this stuff has been ongoing. So what we're in the midst of really is no different. But what's different is the overwhelming information and people struggling in all of these different ways to tell a narrative that's baked into this sort of echo chamber, but nobody can see the long game. And so here I've been, literally in the midst, in the trenches of this battle, getting the details of how systemic corruption works. Because the founders understood, above all else, that absolute control, how does it go? Absolute power creates absolute corruption. Sorry. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I've said this a million times on our truth bombs that, Bastiat, who was a 17th century libertarian philosopher in France, I mean, he put it this way, and I always thought this was quite amazing when I heard it for the first time, which was when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it, which is corruption, okay? It's just control, power, monopolization, whatever, mafia state, all of these different things where, in fact, the way this works in the United States ultimately, and this has always been this vexing situation, is that we're supposedly a democracy that majority rules, but what we have is an inverted version of that, which the minority rules because of all of these situations with, quite frankly, the professional class. I'm talking about, when they legalized corruption with, Citizens United, which was, I keep forgetting the name of that huge it was like, anyway, it goes back to the 70s. I think it was 76 that basically started that long drive to Citizens United, which literally created legalized corruption. Dark money sources could fuel campaigns and basically get their way. And so you see this inverted, perverted sort of situation that has enabled really the most important revelation of them all, which they're all fucking talking around the periphery and they're not speaking to directly, which is what we reveal in the con at www.thecon.tv, which is the Federal Reserve, which some people incorrectly characterize as an independent feature within the United States that has no responsibility to any aspect of the federal government. That's absolute bullshit. Congress is in control of the Federal Reserve if they choose to be. What they do is they basically farmed out independence to the Federal Reserve, because the idea is that if you've got the power of the currency and the power of the printing press, which is digitizing, money into existence, then you could use it for whatever you want. And so they've always tried to create, since the Federal Reserve was created, this sort of like separation, and you got to understand why the Federal Reserve was created to begin with. A lot of people, want to tell me to read Jekyll Island, that puts into perspective exactly what happened during the manifestation of the Federal Reserve. I've read most of it. I understand what happened, but what everybody seems to leave out was that I'd say the entire aspect of the United States from the very beginning. There was the battle between Jefferson and Madison and Adams over, the central bank. And then ultimately, because they didn't want to kind of get into the whole scenario that they rebelled against, but at the same time, you have to have finance. There's no other way to actually grow an economy without finance, but it has to be regulated. Otherwise, it can lend itself to all of these different manifestations of, the dog and pony show and all the tricks of the trade that can create corruption. Okay, this isn't new. This has happened throughout history, not to mention bubbles and all sorts of other aspects that are tied to financialization. And the struggle in the United States really has been between industrialization and financialization. Okay, so that's kind of background. But the bottom line is, you want to create like an engine or flight or anything else, a balance to where all of these forces kind of work in alignment together to create an outcome. That's always been my mentality. That's the idea of dynamism. That's the sophistication of what we should achieve, right? When we have professionals and people with higher technical degrees that come out of the system that get in, the ranks, the job ranks, whatever the case is in government, all of the rest of it, they work in synchronicity to hopefully deliver on what the entirety of the United States government is framed to create, which is of, by, and for the people, which is to create opportunity, which over the course of over 246 years of evolution, the idea of dynamism, upward mobility, the opportunity to sustain yourself in systems that make sense. But the only way that systems can make sense is if the incentive is aligned with the outcome. Once that gets perverted and you start to contextualize all of these different methodologies of high crimes and misdemeanors, you get to understand how corruption can easily overcome the system. And what we're living in 2022 is the result of 4 decades of our financial system literally hijacking every apparatus of government, which was designed to be separate, but they're not. So what we've got in SCOTUS is just an extension of dark money, which again is rule by the minority, and corruption, which is tyranny. So, you've heard me say this over and over and over, but when you look at the big picture, what you have to become as a citizen, if you're not part of the system, right, and where you're benefiting, and if you're not the top 0.001% of it, and if you're not their attorneys and their accountants and everybody that works for that system, if you're literally a politician, that is what happens is those systems basically pay for politicians' campaigns, get them elected, and then those politicians are going to serve them. They're going to write legislation. They're going to, do the bidding of those corporations behind the scenes, and we've seen it over and over and over the last 20 years. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but what you don't know is it's your job to be an informed citizen. It's your job in the tradition and the trajectory of the United States to actually function in your own best interest. And so if you're not getting paid off by corruption, you should want to end it. Not even if you're a victim of it necessarily, but we're all victims of it no matter what. So right now you've got this potpourri of like all these different silos, and this is what we've created over the course of the last, I'm going to call it 10 years specifically, and that's another function of big money and dark money because, if you want to talk about abortion or if you want to talk about, labor rights, or if you want to talk about systemic racism in prison and all of these other, hugely important aspects of American, reality and cultural reality, or gun laws and all of the other things, typically all of these scenarios operate in verticals. Okay, we're going to just talk about this issue and it's going to remain that issue. We're going to talk, no, man, from the time period of literally the late 1890s, like I said before, through the 1930s that ended up with FDR, what you had was this in order to form a more perfect union march, which was women's suffrage, labor rights movement, populism with the farmers, all of these things fighting central power. Why? Because of what the founders knew from the very beginning, which is very American. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Centralized power creates the metaphor that I mentioned, that when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. This is history. This is the way it's always been. So the American tradition is to fight that and to overcome that and to win. And I'm sorry that it's a full contact sport to be engaged as a citizen, but the only reason you have rights to begin with is because of all of the sacrifices that came before. What I'm appealing to you to come out of your cycle, to your silos, your shells, wherever you're coming from, and understand that the entirety of what puts this systemic corruption into stark focus that anybody can understand. I think a sixth grader could watch the con and go, oh my God, I actually know how our system works. It's that simplified, quite frankly. It's not difficult. Yeah, granted, to watch 5 hours, which are compelling and informative and should reach, especially when you realize that there was like 50 to 100 million people that got nailed by this. If we reach 10% of that, obviously, I mean, based on history, you get that kind of amount of people engaged and activated, you can change the world. We've got solutions to every problem that we face if you believe in liberty and justice for all, an integrity of the system, and a system that's supposed to be of, by, and for the people that creates upward mobility. A rising tide raises all ships. Is it always going to be perfect? No, but you got to have accountability. Are we going to, like, if we came together and we created a structure that goes after the biggest villains and the criminals right now and we purge them from our system, is that going to guarantee that 10, 15, 20, 30 years, 200 years from now that, we're going to have a perfect system? No. Democracy and liberty require eternal vigilance. I mean, Jefferson said that, you had to have the blood spilled of patriots every 20 years, to see if you can keep what we gave you. Because the founders didn't really believe we could keep it because they understood human nature, And I got to believe, and I know this to be true, that there are more Americans that are dignified, that believe integrity, that are good, honest people, that have courage than the bastards that are absolute criminals. But unfortunately, the people that are criminals are so much more motivated, they're so much more sophisticated, and they love it when you do nothing. They love it when you kind of just navel gaze and you do your thumb knuckles like whatever that thumb game is, and they expect you to do nothing. They expect you to think it's too hard. They expect you to think somebody else is going to solve your problems. They expect you to keep your head in the sand. They expect you to be weak because when you're weak, they own you. That's not American. Americans are about courage, about power, about winning the good fight. You ever grow up watching Bugs Bunny cartoons? I mean, this is as fundamental to the American character as anything I can ever think of. How about Popeye? What was the whole story of Popeye? Popeye delivers a freaking uppercut to Pluto. Why? Because he's a good dude, man. That's what it's about, right? He's going to get freaking olive oil and whatever. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about it, and I don't need to dumb this down, but the point is it's that fucking simple. What you just need to simply understand is that corruption works a specific way. It's control fraud. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. We have an opportunity to galvanize a movement. If you could just come out of your silos, if you could come together, you could, get informed and knowledgeable by watching the con, spreading the word like wildfire, even if you don't like me and you don't want to, but yet there's something about what I'm saying that seems to kind of resonate as true. Look, I'm telling you something the entire system has moved at great lengths to prevent from you getting to know. And what is the outcome of that? They got $50 trillion for themselves while you're on the verge of getting another layoff. They own the system. They stole $50 trillion plus to maintain the con. How do I know that? I'm the only one in the country that's gone the distance to tell you this. I think I started this off by saying, you really need to name names and just call a spade, man. Look, I've been engaged with, David Sirota, the guy who wrote "Don't Look Up," right? And it basically is satire to tell us that we can't, accomplish big things. And he wrote that with Adam McKay, a great writer that wrote, The Big Short and everything else. And I loved the movie, absolutely loved it. But here's the thing about David Sirota: I've put on a platinum platter the revelations and the evidence of insane corruption in the courts that bulldozed millions of people with illegal documentation fraud that I guarantee you Donald Trump configured in this whole big lie as it relates to the insurrection and all the documentation fabrication as it relates to the election certification. All of this stuff is a continuum. And for example, Sirota won't go there. I think it's because of his ego, personally. I think it's because Sirota wants to establish his own space. He doesn't want competition. And for some reason, he thinks I'm competition. I'm not competition. I'm just some independent, producer that's just trying to get the truth out there that I spent a great deal of time that, from the numbers that I've seen, should actually have already been downloaded by, 100 million people, from my own personal experience. I've said it before and I'll say it again. All of the major players at HBO and Netflix, they didn't take the con. They don't think it's important to reveal that the financial system pulled a dog and pony bait and switch to basically bury illegally tens of millions of people that wasn't anything other than racketeering, which is illegal. It's a crime, and they should all be in prison. I'm talking about the CEOs of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. And honestly, it was all guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States. Anyway, this is a lot more than I wanted to say this morning because I just wanted to make it quick because I got a lot going on. But people, I'm giving you the knowledge, and I'm giving you the opportunity to take the bite of the apple of knowledge. Okay, I'm not trying to get you out of Eden. I'm trying to get you back to it, man. Because the only way we can save the United States from this massive corruption is with the knowledge that we put in the con first and foremost, and then the action moving forward has got to be that we're putting together the justice movement. We're changing the name from the Justice Party to the Justice Movement because that's what it's got to be. It's got to be the same sort of parallel as we had from 1890 to the New Deal. And in fact, I'll finish with this, and this is where I was trying to get to in the conversation. What I'm introducing to you is the clean New Deal. The clean New Deal is the revelation of all of these things that are meant to hold corruption accountable so that we can get back to a government of by and for the people. It has to come from a massive populist movement. It has to come from a mass of millions of people who understand the truth because they have done everything to prevent us from knowing this. And I don't care if it's 60 Minutes or CNN or MSNBC or Fox or the next tier down and the next tier down. None of them have actually put this together. And none of them are going to tell you straight. Why? Because honestly, if they all depend on financing, the last thing they want to do is cut off their financing. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we're talking about. I brought this up in a truth bomb the other day. What's more important, revenue or financing? Well, for most people today, it's financing because it's the government that's buying the bonds that creates this financing. So it's inside pull, which means it's completely corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. I don't know what else to tell you. It's the truth.